Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I presume you have read the message that I gave you. Today it was Dr. Shawka's class of abnormal uterine bleeding, but my class was scheduled for 14th August, but I'm taking it today as I will not be there on the 14th of August. Is that okay with you? Hello, is that okay with you?
Okay, ma'am.
I see that 19 of you have joined and it's already 15 minutes past your scheduled time, so I'm starting now. So today we will discuss about endometrial carcinoma. Now, as you know, the uterus has three linings. The endometrium, which is the innermost lining and which sheds during every menstruation. Then is the myometrium, or the main muscle body of the uterus. And the outer covering is the perimetrium. So, carcinoma of the lining tissue of the endometrium, that is lining tissue of the uterus, that is the endometrium, is the endometrial carcinoma. Now, endometrium is composed of two type of cells. One is the stromal cells, and the other is the glandular cells. The stromal cells, where carcinoma, the cancer which occurs from the stromal cells is usually the carcinoma. It's a sarcoma, which is very rare, and that which arises from the glandular cell of the endometrium is, as you can presume, that it is an adenocarcinoma. So it is this cancer that we are going to talk about today in today's lecture. Now these are the objectives of my presentation. I will take you through epidemiology, the risk factors, the protective factors, the classification, spread, how it clinically presents, the investigations that needs to be done, how we stage the disease, how we treat the disease, and the subsequent follow-up, the recurrence rate, the prognosis, prevention, and screening. So first, as I told you before, is the carcinoma of the endometrial lining. It is one of the most common gynecological malignancy in postmenopausal women. In general women in our country, cervical cancer is still the most commonest, but in postmenopausal women, it is the most common gynecological cancer. Next, as I told you before also, this is an variety is adenocarcinoma. Now this is the gross appearance of endometrial carcinoma. You can see how the lining, the uterus is being cut open to show you the lining and how it is thickened. It is so thick that it has developed furrows in between. So this I told you, from the glands comes the endometrial carcinoma, the topic of our discussion today. Uh, the incidence, if we take the general incidence all over the world, is 2 to 3% of women develop it in their lifetime. The disease is mainly of the postmenopausal woman, but it can also occur in perimenopausal women. And postmenopausal women who present with bleeding, if we study them, about 1/4 will turn up to be a case of endometrial carcinoma. So the point to be taken home today is that any patient who comes with bleeding after she has achieved menopause is to be assessed, and endometrial carcinoma is to be ruled out first. That is the take home message of this. Now, mean age is around 60 years, but as I told you, it can also occur in the perimenopausal, that is before the age of 40 years. The risk factors. You see, any tissue which has got a very rapid growing potential is always at a risk of carcinoma, because when it grows and regrows, then there is at some point of time there is some maybe some aberrant growth, and this aberrant growth leads to cancer. So any cells which are frequently developing and shedding is always at a risk of cancer. And same it is for the endometrium. Now, a person who has an early menarche and a late menopause means that her menstrual age having the regular menstrual period is very long. That is, every time the every month the woman is developing endometrium, shedding endometrium, developing endometrium, shedding. So at any point of this development, it may follow an aberrant path and go on to abnormal cell proliferation. So early menarche and late menopause is a risk factor. So also the nulliparity. Now why nulliparity? Because a patient who gets pregnant has got a long phase of amenorrhea, both during her pregnancy and after pregnancy lactational amenorrhea. So this is a period of time when two things are at a quiescent or at rest. One is the ovary and one is the endometrium. So endometrium is not shedding every month as when the pregnant woman and even after the birth of the baby, and the ovary is also not ovulating. So these two organs are protected if the woman has more number of children. And on contrast, nulliparity, where the woman is not having children, is having her ovulation every month and having her endometrium shed and grown every month. So nulliparity then becomes a risk factor. Unopposed estrogen. Now, there are some pathological conditions like obesity. In obesity, the extra estrogen is coming from the lipid or the fat cells, adipose tissues from the obese woman. In PCOS, there is anovulation. So there is no progesterone to combat the estrogen. So there is unopposed estrogen and unopposed growth of the endometrium. The endometrium continues to grow, getting the estrogen stimulation, and there is no progesterone to combat it. It only breaks down when it outgrows its blood supply. Next is HRT. In HRT means we give hormone to a postmenopausal woman for woman having menopausal symptoms. Now, if the woman does not have an uterus, if she has been hysterectomized, then one can give estrogen because there is no endometrium to stimulate. But if the woman has a uterus, then we need to give progesterone cyclically or continually with the estrogen. It is the estrogen that gives relief to the menopausal symptom, but it is the progesterone that will neutralize the bad effects of estrogen on the endometrium. So progesterone has to be combined with estrogen or given cyclically if you are planning to give HRT to a woman who has her uterus. Next is chronic tamoxifen use. Tamoxifen again is a selective estrogen regulator modulator. This also has it intensifies the action of estrogen on the endometrium. So chronic tamoxifen use also causes hypertrophy of the endometrium. Previous pelvic irradiation, and these are additional risk factors: hypertension, diabetes mellitus. These are additional comorbidities that help in the development of carcinoma. Now, other risk factors are when you are treating some conditions with estrogen. For example, breast cancer or an ovarian cancer. For estrogen dependent cancer, when we are treating with estrogen, we are unknowingly or as a side effect stimulating the endometrium. Family history of endometrial carcinoma has to be taken because there are certain syndromes like the Lynch 2 syndromes where it is genetic, and colon, breast, ovary, and endometrium forms a notorious triad of developing carcinoma at the same time in a woman's lifetime. And also there are some estrogen secreting ovarian cancer like granulosa cell tumor of the ovary. That also again stimulates them. So any estrogen coming from anywhere, whether it is from within the body or being given outside as a medicine, will stimulate the endometrium. And to combat that, one must add progesterone to that therapy. Now, there are certain protective factors as well. As I explained to you earlier, the more number of children means more risk to the endometrium. So, multiparity is a protective factor. Combined oral contraceptive pill is also giving rest to the endometrium. It does not let the endometrium grow disproportionately and causes a periodic shedding, and it has an accompanying progesterone with it so that the estrogen cannot go this way and that way. So it is always being checked by the progesterone that the pill contains. And smoking is one of the protective factors in this case. However much it may damage the lungs and other tissues, it does have a slightly protective effect for endometrial cancer. And physical activity, which means the patient will not be obese, because obesity is, again, as I told you, the adipose cells are a precursor of estrogen. Androgen, basically, which is converted to estrogen in the body. So basically, we have two types of cancer, endometrial cancer. One that is estrogen independent and one that is estrogen dependent. Now, estrogen dependent cancers are usually found in perimenopausal women, the women who are still menstruating and whose ovaries and endometrium are still responding to the circulating estrogen. So when in their body, whenever there is a hyperestrogen, excessive estrogen, they respond with the hyperplasia of the endometrium. And this hyperplasia is at some point of time becomes atypical and then leads to endometrial cancer. Usually these patients are perimenopausal, they are still bleeding, and these are the patients who turn up with abnormal uterine bleeding. Estrogen progesterone receptors are present because, of course, that you can understand when the when the endometrium is responding to the endogenous or exogenous estrogen, it must be having the receptors for estrogen and progesterone. So this is one good factor, because having estrogen receptors means that it also has progesterone receptors, and these are the sect of carcinoma that can be treated by progestogen therapy as part of the medical therapy. The commonest type in this case is usually endometrioid and mucinous type of variety of adenocarcinoma, and it has a favorable prognosis. Any tumor having receptors on it have got a favorable prognosis because they respond both to chemotherapy, to hormone therapy, and like that. The type 2 is the more dangerous type that occurs in the postmenopausal, and the background is an atrophic endometrium. So here there is no question of being stimulated by any estrogen. So it is not related to hyperestrogenism, and the background is an atrophic endometrium, and status is postmenopausal patient. Estrogen progesterone receptors are absent, and the type of cancer is usually adenocarcinoma, is usually serous or clear cell subtypes. They do not respond to any type of hormonal therapy, and they are more aggressive because the lining uterus has become atrophic in postmenopausal, so it easily buries out of the uterus and causes local spread. So it is very aggressive, and therefore it has a poor prognosis. Among all the cancers, all the adenocarcinomas, the varieties, endometrioid is the commonest. It is about 80%, which is followed by adenosquamous carcinoma. The addition of a squamous component to this makes it not very unfavorable prognosis in these cases whenever a squamous component is added to the adeno component. Papillary serous cyst carcinoma and clear cell carcinoma, although the rarest variety, are very aggressive in behavior. Now, this is how the tumor metastasizes. Now, mostly it is local metastasis. It may drop down and involve the cervix first and then the vagina, or it may go along and affect the tube, the fallopian tube, and then onto the ovary, or it may just come out through the perimetrium and involve the parametrium and then go on to the lateral pelvic glands, especially if it invades the cervix, then it becomes same spread as CA cervix, and it involves the lateral pelvic glands. And if it goes on to involve the tube or the ovary, it goes via the ovarian artery and the ovarian vein to the pre and para aortic glands. So this is how it spreads. Mostly this is local spread, but occasionally there is distant spread, and the organs that are involved are usually liver, vertebrae and bones, and sometimes to the supraclavicular lymph nodes. The clinical presentation, as I told you, patients is usually postmenopausal. 25% of patients, postmenopausal patients coming with bleeding, will turn out to be candidates for endometrial carcinoma. But we also must not neglect the perimenopausal group who are coming with abnormal uterine bleeding. They need to be assessed as well. And the factors that to be kept in mind are nullipara, history of early, all the risk factors that I have told you before, history of early menarche, delayed menopause, obesity, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, all these profile are fits the profile of a woman having endometrial carcinoma. So this presence of these factors will make you suspicious that this woman will be maybe having endometrial carcinoma, and your investigations will be along those routes. Now, clinical presentation of endometrial carcinoma, mostly the patients are symptomatic. Asymptomatic is only in 5% or even less than that. We have not seen any asymptomatic endometrial carcinoma till date. So, as you can imagine, then what will be the symptoms? As it involves the shedding surface of the uterus, that is the endometrium, so all varieties of abnormal bleeding will be present. That is may take the form of a postmenopausal bleeding, that may take the form of menorrhagia or excessive bleeding in amount or duration. There may be postcoital spotting, there may be intermenstrual bleeding, or there may be blood-stained vaginal discharge. In postmenopausal women, when the organs are very atrophic, the cervix is also very atrophic, the cervical canal also closes down. So the bleeding that is occurring from the tumor that gets accumulated within the uterine cavity, enlarging the uterine cavity, and so if it is only blood, it becomes hematometra. If it is infected, then it becomes a pyometra, and this little of that discharge may be leaking out of her cervix to give her a purulent vaginal discharge, and the enlargement of the uterus by the hematometra or the pyometra will cause a lower abdominal pain, a dull aching pain, or an acute pain, or a colicky pain. Signs, patient's profile is to be taken into account. There may be varying degree of pallor depending on the degree of bleeding that is occurring from the tumor, the menorrhagia, and whatever signs that she is having. She is losing hemoglobin that way. Per abdominal examination, there may be enlarged uterus due to maybe the exuberant growth of the endometrium itself, or it may be due to the metastasis to the surrounding tissue, or it may be due to the accumulating hematometra or pyometra. So the uterus may be palpable per abdomen, it will be soft, and it may have restricted mobility, and it may be tender if it is infected by pyometra. Now next we do a speculum examination. The cervix usually looks normal, healthy, maybe atrophic in postmenopausal women, or you may see a purulent vaginal or a bloody vaginal discharge coming out of the external os. On biomanual examination, you may either get an atrophic uterus, or you may get a normal uterus, or you get an enlarged uterus. The uterus may be mobile and it may be tender if there is pyometra, or if it has metastasized outside into the parametrium, the mobility may be restricted. And this can be confirmed by per-rectal examination, because in atrophic vagina and atrophic uterus in postmenopausal women, it is very difficult to assess the parametrium by doing a per-vaginal examination. In that case, a per-rectal examination may be needed to assess. Regional lymph nodes must be palpated, including the supraclavicular lymph node, and breast examination must be done because it may coexist. Any breast cancer may also coexist in congenital syndromes like Lynch 2 syndromes. Diagnosis: because the patient has symptoms, so the patient will come running to the doctor, and we will do certain investigations that will help you to diagnose earlier, in contrast to ovarian cancer, which does not give any symptoms, and when the patients arrive it is too late. So when the patient comes with some bleeding symptoms, you have to meticulously take a history and do a physical examination, and you will get the signs and symptoms that I have already told you. Next, you go for a complete hemogram. You see the hemoglobin, and then you go for a transvaginal ultrasound. The transvaginal ultrasound will tell you about the endometrial thickness. It is very difficult to predict how much the endometrial thickness will be in perimenopausal women, because there the endometrium is growing and then shedding. So the endometrium keeps changing in thickness in the perimenopausal woman. So it's very difficult to know unless the surface of the endometrium is very carefully looked for, when you can see an irregular outline of the endometrium or a shaggy endometrium. On the other hand, in a postmenopausal lady, you expect the endometrium to have thinned out, very thin endometrium. So we take that if in a postmenopausal woman lady, if the endometrium is less than 4 millimeter, then the chance of endometrial cancer is very, very less. If it is, so we take 4 millimeter as the cutoff limit to evaluate the endometrium. And how do we evaluate the endometrium? By doing a biopsy. We can do dilatation and curettage and curate out the endometrium and do a histopathological examination for confirmation of our pathological diagnosis. But the drawback here is that it is a blind procedure. Curating the endometrium is blind procedure, and at best you can sample at the most 40 to 50% of the endometrium. So you may entirely miss the area of the pathological endometrium. So to improve on that, what we can do is do a hysteroscopic and a hysteroscopically directed biopsy. By a hysteroscope, it is basically a endoscope that goes inside the uterine cavity, visualizes the entire uterine cavity, and we can take biopsy from the site that appears to be abnormal to the naked eye. So this is till now the gold standard for diagnosing endometrial carcinoma, and this procedure is now being developed as an office procedure. You do not have to admit the patient and prepare the patient and go to the OT. This can be an office procedure as well, so it becomes very easy for a woman to come into the clinic and get diagnosed stat. So transvaginal ultrasound, endometrial thickness 4 millimeter is usually taken. Here it is written 5 millimeter. Hyperechogenic endometrium, as I told you before, irregular outline, hyperechogenic endometrium, and an endometrium that is growing abnormally has to have a good supply of blood. Otherwise, without blood, the endometrium cannot thrive and become hyperplastic. So there will be increased vascularity. If you do a color Doppler on transvaginal ultrasound, there will be increased vascular blood flow and low vascular resistance, because there is pooling of blood inside the cancerous tissue, and so there is low vascular resistance, very friable blood vessels. And there may be intrauterine fluid, as I told you. There may be pyometra, there may be hematometra, so that can be visualized on ultrasound. So this is the way that hysteroscopic directed biopsy is done. The hysteroscope is introduced. This can be an office procedure, as I told you. The instrument itself is known as an office hysteroscope. And a Pepel biopsy can be taken, which eliminates the need for introducing an instrument like a curette, which needs cervical dilatation. A Pepel is a small small, what do you call that? It's like a copper T introducer, a small plastic tubing that is pushed into the endometrium, and the endometrium is syringed out. So that is also a office procedure. The way that you do MVA in doing abortion, that same negative suction brings out the endometrium. Pap smear here is not very diagnostic. It is a mainstay of diagnosis for cervical CA, but abnormal glandular cells are sometimes found, and that will lead you to further investigation. Of 1 to 5% of endometrial carcinoma, pap smear or endocervical curettage is required to evaluate the cervical involvement as well, because cervical and endometrial carcinoma can coexist, or the endometrial carcinoma has spread to the cervix, and now the cervix is shedding the abnormal cells. So now your pap smear will be abnormal. So it's a very late stage. It's already stage 2 by then. Pre-operative evaluation we have to do before we start on any therapy. So that will be a physical examination to see whether the patient can withstand whatever therapy we are going to planning for her, whether it's surgery or radiotherapy or chemotherapy. So routine blood, sugar, urea, creatinine, LFT, that is sugar, urea, creatinine for renal function test, LFT, CA125. Urine is tested for protein, sugar, pus cells. ECG is done, a chest X-ray, pelvic USG, abdominopelvic, CT scan, MRI, PET. CT scan, MRI, PET are additional investigations that may or may not be done, but it will give you an idea about the stage of the disease. If endometrial carcinoma, it is not for diagnosis basically, but it is for staging, because then you can know how much of the myometrium it has invaded, or the carcinoma is still limited to the endometrium, or it has invaded the myometrium, or it has permeated to reach outside of the uterus, or it has gone down to invade the cervix. That can be delineated by pelvic CT, MRI, or a PET scan. Or even the involvement of the lymph nodes can be assessed by these. So based on this surgical and pathological evaluation, basically the staging is a surgical staging. By pre-operative evaluation, we can get an idea of staging, but actual staging is done on the OT table if she is being put up for surgery. Stage 0 is atypical hyperplasia only, and this is ascertained by a histopathological examination by doing a curettage and taking a biopsy only. If it comes at atypical hyperplasia, nothing needs to be done, no surgery is to be done then at that moment. So it is stage 0, but you have to keep a tab on the patient. Next is stage 1. Stage 1 is tumor limited to the uterus. 1A is limited to the endometrium, and 1B is invasion of less than half of myometrium, and 1C is more than half of myometrium is involved. Next is stage 2, when there is extension to cervix. Stage 2A is when there is only involvement of endocervical glands, and stage 2B is invasion of the cervical stroma. As we are going down in the stage, the prognosis is becoming worse and worse. So involvement of glands has got a better prognosis than involvement of the stroma. Stage 3 is, as I told you, the main thing is spread is first just outside, adjacent spread. So A is again invades serosa or adnexa, or there is a positive cytology when we are doing a peritoneal washing. Stage 3B is when there is vaginal invasion. So it has got out of the cervix and onto the vagina. Stage 3C is when it has spread to the lymph nodes. It may be pelvic lymph nodes or para-aortic or pre-aortic lymph nodes. Stage 4 is distant metastatic spread. Again, 4A is adjacent organs like bladder or rectum, and distant metastasis is B, to the lungs or to the bones. Now, regarding modalities of treatment, there we have surgery, which is obviously the mainstay of treatment. Then adjuvant therapy in the form of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and hormonal therapy. Exclusive radiotherapy is reserved for those women who are unable to who are not fit for surgery, or whose stage is beyond surgery, that is advanced stage of the disease. So based on the tumor grade and depth of the myometrial invasion, what surgery we do a total abdominal hysterectomy, that is removing of the uterus, both body and cervix. Bilateral salpingo-oophorectomy, that is removing both the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. Plus we take pelvic washings from the peritoneal fluid as we open the abdomen, and we can do with or without pelvic and periaortic node dissection. Now, in stage 1, we do not need to do any pelvic or periaortic node dissection. Now, how do we know that it is stage 1? After doing the hysterectomy, we cut open the uterus. If there is a scope for frozen section biopsy, there's nothing like it. But where we do not have that scope, we can do a naked eye assessment after cutting open the uterus and seeing the depth of involvement of the myometrium. If the myometrium seems to be involved, then we are to do a total lymph node clearance, that is pelvic lymph node clearance. Now, in stage 2 and 3, that is when the spread has gone to the outside or to the cervix, then you have to do a complete node dissection along with the hysterectomy and bilateral salpingo. Now, stage 4, there is no surgical option. Stage 4 means the bladder or the rectum is involved. Here, there is no scope of any exenteration operation. It's a very debilitating operation. Or if there is distant metastasis, there is no scope of any surgical intervention. Next is hormone therapy. As I told you, in those cancers, those type of cancers that has estrogen and progesterone receptors, these are very sensitive to progesterone therapy. So this, when we do after the removal of the uterus, we usually, along with the histopathological diagnosis, we go for immunohistochemistry and also for receptor analysis. If there is receptor and if she needs any further adjuvant therapy, maybe because you have done an incomplete clearance or there is a recurrence of the disease, then this is one modality that you still have in hand to treat the patient by giving parenteral large doses of progesterone. Next is chemotherapy. In advanced, recurrent, or metastatic disease, chemotherapy is another option, but again, chemotherapy is not very good for adenocarcinomas. In that case, radiotherapy is better. So, when do we do radiotherapy? When the patient, as I told you, medically she is unfit for surgery, or she has an inoperable disease, that is late stage 3B or 4 disease. Contraindications of radiotherapy are pelvic, kidney, pyometra. If pyometra is a relative contraindication, you have to drain the pyometra, treat the infection or the pelvic abscess, whatever is there, and then when the infection is corrected, you can go for radiotherapy. Prior pelvic irradiation, if she has received, it is unlikely for the patient to respond again to repeat radiation. Previous laparotomy or adhesions will again be not be a favorable case to take up for radiotherapy. Now, after you have treated the patient must be on a follow-up, on a regular follow-up schedule every 4 months for the first 2 years and then every 6 months for the next 2 years. So 4 years she has to be regularly follow up and then she has to come to you annually. And when she comes to you for a follow up examination, first you have to ask about the history, whether she has any complaints, any pain, any discharge. And then you have to do a thorough physical examination, a biomechanical, because recurrence usually occurs in the vault or in the vagina. So, thorough physical examination. Lungs is a site of distant metastasis, so you have to do a chest x ray. A regular serum CA125 estimation sometimes helps in detecting recurrences. Mammography, because the breast is there, and if it is a part of the Lynch syndrome, then she may later go on to develop a another carcinoma. So, routine mammography and CT MRI when indicated. When we are suspecting that she is having a recurrence, then a CT MRI or even a PET scan will help you to see the site of recurrence. Recurrent disease is, as I told you, commonly in the vagina and pelvis. So that is the need for doing a thorough physical examination. By doing a biomanual examination, you can feel the tumor, or you can, by speculum examination, you can see the growth in the vagina. Majority or 60% who have recurrence usually present within 6 years of the initial therapy. Management of recurrent disease is usually radiation, because they have already done surgery. So surgery now has got a very limited value. Radiation therapy is the next best choice because it is an adenocarcinoma. Hormonal therapy, if she was proven to be having progesterone receptors. Chemotherapy is there but is not much effective. Prognostic factors. What are the prognostic factors that will indicate that this patient will have a bad prognosis and needs more frequent follow-up? One is histologic grade. It's the single most, the higher the grade, the worse is the prognosis. Depth of the myometrial invasion, the more the deep, the more worse is the prognosis. Histologic types, I told you before, serous cell type. Endometrioid has got the best prognosis. The remaining ones have got worse prognosis. Original tumor volume is also important, how big the tumor was. Pelvic lymph node involvement, if found, has got a worse prognosis. And of course, extension to the cervix and adnexal masses, positive peritoneal washings, these are all indicators of worse prognosis. The survival rate, when we talk about cancer cure, we talk in terms of 5-year survival. So how much has the patient survived? How many patients survive in the consecutive 5 years, successive 5 years after your therapy? So in this stage, for stage 1 patients, they survive for 5 years, 83%. Patients survive for 5 years. In stage 2 disease, it comes down to 71, and it drops alarmingly to stage 3 to 39 and stage 4 to 27%. Prevention, we can prevent by modifying our lifestyle, which will bring down the chances of obesity, blood pressure, and diabetes. We can restrict the use of estrogen, or whenever you are using estrogen, we have to remember that we have to give cyclical progesterone along with the estrogen. And women who are reporting with any sort of abnormal uterine bleeding, whether in the perimenopausal or postmenopausal, must have a thorough evaluation for endometrial carcinoma. So that brings us to the end of this session. I think that in a nutshell is good enough for you at this stage. When you are through to the part 2, then you will be studying it in more detail. If you have any question at this point, I'm there to answer.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Can you please repeat why chemotherapy is not a suitable treatment for recurrent disease?
because basically this cancer is an adenocarcinoma, right? It is coming from the glands. So adenocarcinoma does not respond very well to chemotherapy. Chemotherapy used in this case is only used as an adjuvant or a neoadjuvant therapy for before we give radiation, because it makes radiation more tissues more radiosensitive. But chemotherapy per se does not kill the adenocancerous cells. So it is the same reason why your endocervical cancers, which are again adenocarcinomas, do not respond. In that case, we have to go for surgery, or we have to go for a radiotherapy, brachytherapy, or teletherapy.
Okay, thank you,
Yes.
ma'am. And then since
Okay.
type 2 is not related to hyperestrogenism, then the risk factors are essentially for type 1 endometrial carcinoma.
Yes, yes. And also to some extent for type 2 also, because it lays the foundation. These factors are laying the foundation for a later, when the patient ages, that may not be due to direct estrogen stimulation, but these obesity and fat and diabetes and hypertension, these are all laying the foundation for developing atrophic carcinoma on in the background of atrophic endometrium later when the patient ages above 60.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Anything else? Or should we call it a day then?
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you.